Hey everyone, it's Jeff Young, kinesiologist again. This video is a continuation of my last one where I explained linear periodization and some general concepts and guidelines as to how to set up the 10 to 15 repetition range, more specifically 13 to 15 repetition range, and then what to do when you move down to the 10 to 12 rep range. In this one, I'm going to piggyback off of that and explain some general concepts and guidelines as to how a linear periodized program should begin to evolve as you move away from the strength endurance ranges and more towards strength. So this one's on the 8 to 10 rep range and covers some really important points that you're going to want to make sure you consider and include in your overall program design as you move through these various repetition ranges. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into it. A linear periodized resistance training program means that the individual is moving from rep range to rep range in a linear fashion, typically in 2 to 4 week phases. With new clients, I usually start with 3-week phases in each rep range, and then the next time we cycle through each rep range, I allow the individual to choose how long they want to spend in each phase based on their own goals and preferences. Having said that, since increasing strength is important for nearly every health, fitness, musculoskeletal, and performance goal, I always recommend that in the 8 to 10 repetition range, the phase should be preferably 3 to 4 weeks in length. As with any phase, while there are several variables that can be manipulated within it, such as rest between sets and exercise selection, one of the primary goals should be to make sure that at the end of the phase, the person is a little bit stronger than they were compared to week one, which means from week to week, you want to try to slightly increase the weights you're lifting, even if it's only by a few pounds. Don't fall into the trap of always using the same loads for each exercise, session after session. In a linear periodization model for general and special populations, the 8 to 10 rep range means that the higher repetition ranges have preceded it, which also means that the person is beginning to move away from strength endurance using lighter loads and towards strength, now using moderate loads. Primary adaptations in this rep range include a mix of moderate increase in strength, an increase in lean muscle tissue, assuming the person is consuming adequate protein. And although the loads are moving away from optimal improvements in strength endurance, there's still going to be strength endurance adaptations. But keep in mind, adaptations in resistance training only occur if the individual is choosing loads that are taking them to at or near muscle failure, which a lot of people don't do. Nearly everything in fitness works on a continuum, and this situation is no different. On a continuum of exercise selection, there will be many similarities between this rep range and the 10 to 15 rep range. But because the emphasis is slowly beginning to shift towards increases in strength, the selection of exercise needs to correspond. Similar to the 10 to 15 rep range, within the overall program design, the person should include both bilateral and unilateral exercises and strengthening in each of the 3 planes of movement. But in the 8 to 10 rep range, the emphasis is beginning to lean more towards bilateral exercises, especially on heavier intensity days. For the lower body, on heavy days, this is going to mean squat and deadlift variations with the occasional hip thrust and leg press thrown in for variety, or just to give the joints like the knees and the low back a break. On lighter days, emphasis should still mostly be on bilateral exercises, but the individual shouldn't completely neglect unilateral exercises such as lunge variations. And when performing lunges, make sure to always include variations in the frontal plane such as diagonal and side lunges. Moving to the upper body and beginning with the back. On heavier intensity days, the emphasis should be on bilateral exercises like pull-ups, barbell rows, lat pull-down, and seated rows. Lighter intensity days can still include bilateral exercises, but should also include single-arm row variations such as cable and dumbbell rows. As mentioned in my previous video, the chest is one muscle group where the exercises don't change much no matter what the rep range. One difference, though, is that for most people, once you get below 10 reps per set in your overall program design, Push-ups are going to be removed in favor of mostly dumbbell press variations, since they're less stressful on the joints, and occasionally barbell bench press variations, which are slightly more stressful on the joints. Moving to the shoulders, the 10 to 15 rep range is the perfect rep range to focus mostly on shoulder health, emphasizing rotator cuff and middle trapezius strengthening, and single joint movements like lateral raises and scaptions. In the 8 to 10 repetition range, these types of exercises can still be programmed on lighter days, but on heavy intensity days, the emphasis should shift to bilateral movements like overhead or landmine press variations and wide grip upright rows. To further define heavy and light days, heavy days means that most sets should be terminated 1 to 2 repetitions shy of repetition maximum. Lighter days means that sets should be terminated 2 to 3 repetitions shy of repetition maximum. The reason the difference is small is because by their very nature, lower repetition ranges don't allow the person to leave too many reps in the tank. They aren't performing too many reps in the first place. Also, it's fine to take some sets to repetition maximum or muscle failure, but most sets should be sub-max. A total body program still needs to include strengthening for the hips, more specifically the adductors and hip abductors, as well as include knee extensions and knee curls, the calves, and the core. Hip abductor and adductor strengthening and knee extensions and curls are important for hip, low back, and knee health. You don't need to do a lot of sets of those exercises. Even 1 or 2 is better than nothing, but you do want to make sure they aren't neglected. There's no need to change the flow of a session in this rep range as compared with the 10 to 15 range. Now that loads are getting heavier, rest between sets should slightly increase, and there's still plenty of time to superset between muscle groups to be time efficient. My preference is, following the dynamic warm-up, to begin by supersetting between legs and back, and then once we've completed those exercises, superset between either chest and hips or chest and knee extensions and curls, and finally between shoulders and calves. Core strengthening can be on separate days or inserted in the middle or towards the end of the session. The concept of sets per muscle group per week won't change. The goal should still be to get a minimum of 10 sets per muscle group within the scope of each week for legs, back, and chest to at least begin to optimize the overall program and start to get the most out of it. Below 10 reps per muscle group per week will keep most people in a beginner range of strength, which defeats the purpose of strength training. So that's a general overview of how to set up the 8 to 10 repetition range. There will be a lot of differences from person to person, especially in how the flow of a session is set up, in exercise selection based on what they have access to, what they enjoy or don't enjoy, and based on mobility issues or joint pain. But the main concepts in this range that shouldn't get lost is that the person is lifting heavier loads compared with the higher repetition ranges. So there needs to be a corresponding shift in emphasis from a nice mix of both bilateral and unilateral exercises towards the inclusion of mostly bilateral exercises. Also, lighter days aren't going to be as light anymore. At the most, sets should be terminated 3 reps shy of repetition maximum, but usually 1 or 2 reps shy. So make sure you include these changes so that all your rep ranges don't look the same. As you're starting to see, you definitely want to change the emphasis on things from repetition range to repetition range, because the goal should be slightly different when rep ranges are higher as compared with when they're moderate and especially when they're lower. So make sure you check out my video on the 4 to 8 repetition range so that you can understand how the overall program should look. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.